So Valerie, let me know when you're ready to get started.
Absolutely. It is now 2:15 and we are ready to begin. Everyone should have enough time to get here from the other session. So let's go ahead and let's introduce our speaker today, Dr. Janice Smith. She is lead for the Karuta Open Source Portfolio Project under the umbrella of the Apereo Foundation. She has been involved with ePortfolio development and customization since the mid-90s. Her background is in English as a second language, faculty and teaching assistant development, and support for teaching and learning in higher education. She was a leading member of the Sakai open source portfolio community and has worked to develop the Karuta open source portfolio as the next generation portfolio for integration with Sakai and use as a standalone platform. So let's welcome Dr. Janice Smith as our presenter today.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I recognize at least one of your names, Alice's name. This is for those of you who attended my workshops on portfolios last June or July, this is a kind of a combination of the things that I did last then with some additional content. So welcome to the session. I've included, let's see now. There we go. I've included an abstract of what is going to be discussed, and I think you have the abstract on your conference program. So let's start with some ePortfolio basics. In higher ed, excuse me, I've got to move this bar. There we go, so I can read the screen. Sorry for the slight delay here. Okay, the literature on teaching and learning in higher education suggests a number of things. That it's important for teachers to let go of being the atlas in the classroom who holds the world up on his or her shoulders and become a guide on the side instead of the sage on the stage, to let students do more of the work and more of the learning in the classroom. In doing so, we embrace a new paradigm of learning, where we're putting the focus on learners. This has been a long time coming, and hopefully everybody's on board, but exactly how to do it remains an interesting question. Well, ePortfolios can help us with this plan. There are many ePortfolio purposes. One purpose is learning portfolios, another assessment portfolios, and a third career development portfolios. I'm sorry, I can't control this phone that's ringing. It'll stop shortly. So learning portfolios focus on developing academic and professional skills. Assessment portfolios use data from learning portfolios to focus on programmatic or institutional improvement. And career development portfolios take advantage of learning portfolios to focus on sharing attractive displays of evidence with others. Lately, we've discovered that ePortfolios have become a meta high-impact educational practice, where if they are done well, we can advance student success with improved pass rates, grades, and retention. We can support reflection, integration, and deep learning. And we can catalyze learning-centered instructional change. For more information, consult the new volume called High Impact ePortfolio Practice. Some of my colleagues have proposed that there are literacy skills involved in using ePortfolios. These skills allow students to use the portfolio well to collect evidence of their learning and learn about learning through the use of the portfolio. In fact, these skills are necessary for lifelong learning, and by using a portfolio, a student can develop them. They include collecting evidence, self-regulation in relation to that evidence, reflecting upon evidence by contextualizing the meaning and significance of learning, integrating evidence across contexts, and collaborating with others to build knowledge and skills based on that evidence. Now, the whole point of this presentation is to think about planning for a portfolio at your institution, regardless of what platform you might be using. As you begin your project, ask yourself some questions. What is your primary purpose? What are your more specific goals? How will you involve your stakeholders? Have you identified your desired learning outcomes? How will you integrate portfolios into your curriculum? What about motivating faculty and student involvement and training and supporting portfolio users? And how will you know, most importantly, whether you've achieved your portfolio goals as you progress in your project? In considering these questions, there are 6 strategies to follow for portfolio success. The first is really understanding your purpose and reinforcing that purpose as you continue your project. Next, emphasize documentation and reflection amongst your participants. These are skills that students and faculty do not necessarily know a lot about, but they're important for an effective use of a portfolio. Planning for guidance from faculty and or student peers. If students don't feel like someone is helping them do their portfolio, they may neglect to participate in the project. Using portfolios to link to and reinforce learning outcomes. Using portfolios to integrate learning across contexts and disciplines, and encouraging learners to strive for authenticity in and ownership of their portfolios. Now, as we go along, Valerie is keeping track of any questions or comments, and she can interrupt me at any time. So use the chat window to ask questions, and we'll gladly stop and try to answer. So what are the challenges to configuring your portfolio? So these challenges, as I've briefly outlined, start with beginning with your primary purpose. You may be trying to encourage deep learning or developing skills, knowledge, abilities. Some potential strategies involve integrating the portfolios across courses and programs or with co-curricular contexts. Making sure that your users understand the benefits of using the portfolio. Designing activities and prompts to interest and motivate. Just like any new innovation, people need to be attracted to it and to understand the benefits of doing it and learn to fit it into the things they already do. And to do that, you may need to build in guidance and formative feedback, either from faculty or from student peers. Some of the most successful projects for portfolios in the US have involved student peers who cheerlead their fellow students in using the portfolio to dramatic end. For an assessment portfolio, you're going to be layering additional activities in order to assess learning, which hopefully will be used to improve teaching and collect institutional data on learning in order to contribute to an accreditation process. To do this, you need to involve your stakeholders, to use a backwards design to plan for the exact data you need, identify and link to quality rubrics, share these rubrics with students, and most importantly for faculty, replace rather than add to the evaluator workload. So faculty will be taking on different tasks in relation to portfolios, and they need to be encouraged to let go of some of the things that portfolios can replace. It's important to consider inter-rater reliability. In order to collect the data, you need to plan for reports that are hopefully automated and allow for administrative monitoring. Now, a career development portfolio, or another word for it is showcase portfolio, is going to motivate students who would like to share displays of their evidence of learning with others, perhaps for the job search or to work with mentors or to apply to graduate school or to equate their peers with or family with their accomplishments. Employers are becoming more and more interested in using portfolios to evaluate future employees, and many institutions are thinking of portfolios as a way to support lifelong learning. To do this well, we need to have opportunities for self-expression, different ways to share with different individuals hopefully outside the authentication procedure so that they don't have to log in order to see the portfolio. Some institutions are creating institutional galleries of the portfolios that their students produce. And some other institutions are allowing users to access their portfolios after graduation. I think that's the most common question that a student will ask. Can I take it with me after I graduate? Planning to help the students acquire portfolio literacy involves helping them learn what these literacies are and the skills involved in accomplishing each literacy. So for collecting evidence, students need to understand what are relevant learning artifacts, how to link these artifacts to the learning outcomes for their course or their program or their degree. They need information about how to effectively document and reflect upon artifacts. Document means explaining where they got the information and what it means. Reflection has to do with how it relates to their learning in general and perhaps to other aspects of the evidence that they've collected. And this process needs to be iterative over time. Self-regulation, the second portfolio literacy skills, involves students becoming aware of how they learn so that they begin to monitor and improve their learning behaviors and transfer those learning behaviors to new contexts. Reflection, something that we all need help in doing, helps us identify our goals, tell the story of our learning, and become aware of the meaning and significance of that learning. Integration is something that does not happen automatically. Students need help in transferring their learning across disciplines and across curricular and co-curricular contexts. So integration has to do with synthesizing learning from different contexts and transferring that from schooling to life outside the classroom. For collaboration, we need to help students participate effectively in a community of practice, something that is very important in preparing for the workplace, and learn to collaborate well with others and contribute their skills and talents to what will happen outside of the classroom. Again, if there are any questions or comments, Valerie will hopefully interrupt me.
Janice, we have one comment that might be appropriate right now, since we were talking about employability and so forth. Alice made a great point that a lot of teacher ed programs use the ePortfolio system, and maybe you could also interject what other types of programs tend to lean towards that.
Sure, yes, teacher ed is a wonderful preparation using portfolios, since many teachers are going to be required to create teaching portfolios as they proceed, or perhaps even submit a teaching portfolio in order to graduate from their teacher preparation courses. Others, in other types of portfolio disciplines include nursing and other medical profession schools, engineering, writing, art, really any discipline could use a portfolio, but some are predisposed and some have a long tradition of written portfolios that can be improved by becoming digital. So very good point. So here's a reminder, portfolios are only a tool. And like any tool, it's important to consider what is the most appropriate technology for that tool, and how will your users use the tool, and can you motivate them to use the tool? In fact, a while back I did a study of all the portfolio projects that I knew of that did not succeed, and usually the problem was that faculty and students somehow missed the boat in learning to use the portfolio tool, in using it regularly, in understanding how it could help them, and getting reinforcement from others for their use of that tool. In this session, we're not going to pick a particular platform, But because we have access to the Karuta open source portfolio, I'm going to use it for examples of the process of portfolio configuration. But there are many commercial products and also do-it-yourself portfolios using things like WordPress or Google Sites that can be used to create a portfolio process for your institution. The Karuta open source portfolio is sponsored by the Apereo Foundation. It has completed incubation under the foundation. It is in use on 3 continents, in Europe, in North America, and in Japan. And it is, we believe, completely flexible for all types of portfolios. It can also be LTI integrated with Sakai. So how would you configure a learning portfolio using a software like Karuta? First, there are many decisions to make. Are you going to create one portfolio across many contexts or different portfolios for different purposes? Will the students use the portfolio for one term, for the duration of a program, or throughout their degree? Does it have an organizing principle? Are you basing it on learning outcomes, on specific activity types, or is it more open-ended, something that's going to need some structure somehow to get students and faculty to participate in it? Will it be required? Will students be required to enter information each term or in each course or through a particular program or in order to graduate? Again, could it be open-ended? Usually, if there's no structure involved, there's going to be a problem. Students need some kind of motivation, some kind of reward system, and some kind of consequence for not participating in the project. So here's an example of organizing by learning outcome. Here we have the AAC and U value rubrics being used to display outcomes and allow students to enter data, reflect upon it, document that data, and be evaluated. We could also organize by learning, by learning objectives. What's that? Excuse me, yeah, I got interrupted briefly. Okay, we could organize by activity. So this is a little more open-ended. I'm sorry, I've got a heavy finger on my screen here. So here's an example of organizing by co-curricular activities, where students can enter the particular activities that they have accomplished and provide evidence about it. It's a much more open-ended model. And here's a completely open-ended idea of asking students to explain things about me. We need to provide guidance. There could be detailed instructions. That instructions could and probably should vary according to context. They can be hidden or displayed according to whether the students need to see them or not. Prompts, which help students think about what are they going to put in their portfolio, what evidence are they going to select, how are they going to reflect. They need to be motivating. Again, they should be varied, and open-ended is good, but too open-ended means students don't know what to do. Choice of artifacts, they could be assigned, they could be open-ended. Students could provide multiple artifacts for a particular learning outcome or one artifact for each outcome. And more, they could be multimedia. Linking to outcomes is one way to do the portfolio. The outcomes could be supplied by the portfolio and challenge the students to find the right artifacts to meet the outcome, or they could be open-ended and the student chooses the outcome that matches the evidence they choose to supply. So here's an example of a detailed set of instructions that can be toggled on and off. Artifacts can be, here's an example of multiple and open-ended artifacts. So students can upload many images, write text, put in links, submit videos, etc. Here's an example of linking to outcomes where the outcome is provided and the student is asked to select the evidence that relates to that outcome. Reflection prompts can be varied, or they can be structured, and so on. Okay, configuring an assessment portfolio, we have more decisions. Will it be built on a learning portfolio or standalone? What kind of data is being collected? Will the data end up being quantified? In other words, will we use rubrics to quantify the evaluation of that data and come up with numbers? There's pros and cons. Will students be given samples of the kinds of artifacts that they might supply? Is it going to be linked to outcomes? Will there be evaluators involved? Will the rating be anonymous? Will the data be aggregated in reports? Will those reports contain averages of evaluation quantitative data? Will there be thresholds in which you're a way to explain a threshold is we might be aiming for 80% of the students score at least a 3 out of 4 on a particular rubric criteria. Will the rubrics be available to students? Can students do self-evaluation with the rubrics? Can the rubrics be easily used, and one way to think about it is clickable by the evaluators. Click, 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 I'm done with that evaluation. Are there due dates for the assessment collection? Is there a schedule for the evaluators doing the evaluation of the assessment? What kind of feedback do students get? Is it formative as well as summative? Will the students be able to see the ratings they've received? Will these ratings be anonymous? Will they be able to see comments? Is there a dashboard that helps either students or evaluators keep track of progress? So here's these examples from Karuta are relatively simple. They could be much more elaborated with bells and whistles. But here, the student is being exposed to a standard that contains a component, and they receive evaluation of their artifacts according to a rubric, here with a drop down where mastery is 4 and partial mastery is 3, and so on. Here's a clickable rubric in Karuta where the faculty can see, can see all of the outcomes all at once across many rubrics and across the different descriptors for each criterion. Here's an example of the students seeing the ratings made by the students. I'm sorry, I have a dog sitting right next to me that's demanding attention. So I'm getting somewhat distracted. Okay, here's an example of a student dashboard and another student dashboard helping students keep track of the kinds of data that they've supplied and the ratings that they've received on those outcomes. Here's a aggregation of data by student where the student receives an average of the scores that they've received for each outcome. Here's an example of students receiving the comments, in this case anonymous, about the outcomes. Here's an example of an aggregated report for at least 2 students, but there could be, sorry about that, my computer is skipping. Where the student scores are being aggregated on one screen. And here's an example of the data download for a customized report. So the last example has to do with career development or showcase portfolios. Again, the decisions. Will the student be able to provide their own expression within the portfolio where they can hide or show that portfolio? Can they do multiple views where they take the same data but change it differently for different viewers? Will there be an institutional frame that regularizes the data, or will it be completely open-ended where a student can do anything they want? Will the student be able to control the CSS or the HTML aspects of the portfolio? Can the institution save on storage costs by using OEmbed or YouTube for video? Or will there be institutional storage options that allow students to upload any number of items into their portfolio? Can artifacts be repurposed, which is a portfolio principle that allows students to take artifacts from one context and use them in other contexts to show how their learning has progressed? Will these artifacts be available from the LMS? One problem we're having with integration with Sakai is that there is a security barrier that prevents items available in resources from being used in externally LTI integrated software in Sakai. So sharing, is there a public URL that the students can share of their portfolio, or will they be using password protected methods via email? Will there be an institutional gallery that the students can optionally or be required to participate in? Are there advisors, peer coaches, a career center to help students with setting up their showcase portfolio? Some examples. It's helpful to have a welcome page with an overview. It's helpful to have customizable content. Here we have block-like content where each photo, it unlocks a page where the students can either upload a video or provide text or some other multimedia content. And are there things like pop-ups where you can display more text in a accessible way? Okay, finally, implement your portfolio project. After you've decided how to set it up, it's time to move forward with a development process. And what we would recommend in the Karuta area is that you create a prototype, that you pilot, that you start small and you plan for expansion, because you're going to want to make changes. Things that you assume are the way you should do it, you may find that you wish you had changed your mind. So starting small with a prototype and then augmenting that prototype over time with pilots until you get a portfolio process that you can stick with for a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. You're going to want to do ongoing revisions to rubrics and activities, to the rating process, and to reports. You're going to want to consider how you're going to integrate this portfolio with other applications, the LMS, the SIS, how the users are going to authenticate to get into the portfolio. And you're going to want to put together a management process that includes functional leaders, support teams, and technical troubleshooters, even if you're using a proprietary software, but especially if you're using open source.
Janice, we have a question.
Yes.
The question is, could you expand more on the institutional portfolio? How long would that be displayed? And could you talk about an example of this?
Well, now that's an interesting term, institutional portfolio. One way to, I'm not sure what is meant, but institutions sometimes are asked to create portfolios about themselves for the accreditation process. Or you could think of an institutional portfolio as a kind of graduation portfolio where the student is asked to meet certain learning outcomes in order to graduate from the institution. these outcomes would cover the whole curriculum for the institution. Can the person asking the question clarify which type of portfolio is being asked about?
If they could put that in the chat, that would be great. I know at my particular institution, it is actually, the terminology we use here is institutional effectiveness. Basically, it's the assessment portion of the entire institution that you mentioned for accreditation. So that may be some of the verbiage that we're looking for, but we'll wait and let that person chime in the chat.
I certainly could say that portfolios can be used to assemble all the data that an institution would need to apply for and keep accreditation. And that could include the student data that is assembled and aggregated and supplied, and it could include the institutional data on top of that. So it's kind of an expanding idea depending on what you're trying to collect and evaluate and display. I think we'll leave it there until they ask a second question. So for steps to, were there any more questions, Valerie?
We do have one more that just came in that is separate from another user. And the question is, would that be more like a capstone portfolio that you were referring to earlier, or do you mean a portfolio that follows you through your whole academic career?
Actually, you could look at it either way, and this really has to do with all the decision-making processes that I've been covering. Getting really clear on what you're trying to do is very important. Everybody needs to be on board in terms of, is this a portfolio that's going to follow a student throughout their degree process, or is it going to represent what they have learned throughout the years, but taking place only in a capstone environment, which implies a senior semester of some sort or a senior year within a particular course or a particular context. There is no one right way to do this, but when users get confused about what they're supposed to do when and why they're doing it and how this is going to pay off for them and pay off for the institution, you can end up with a very mixed bag of some users doing what they've been asked to do and others putting it off and others never coming through. So a capstone portfolio is a great idea. An institutional portfolio throughout the whole 4 years is also a good idea. What do you have the energy to sustain? How can you motivate people to get on board? Having a smaller project that most people participate in and succeed in is going to be much better use of your energy than a large project that drops off and people get discouraged and don't know what they're doing. I hope that was a good summary of some pros and cons. If I have one message, it is be very careful about how you're using your resources, because at the very minimum, you want a successful project that will motivate people to do more rather than an unsuccessful project where people get confused or bored or unclear or rebellious or resentful or all the things that can happen when you have a great idea for change, but you haven't quite managed the change process well.
In addition to that particular question, Alice also asks, what about for academic staff for performance appraisals? If we used it for staff, maybe it would then be used for their courses and their students.
Okay, so whenever it comes to staff and the evaluation, performance reviews, tenure discussions, one needs to be extremely careful because it can very quickly turn into a situation where the faculty are suspicious that they're being somehow manipulated by the administration to somehow not have their data used appropriately or what have you. The more grassroots you can make it, the more time-saving, efficient, helpful guidance. We're in this together. We wanna make the whole tenure or evaluation process easier and less painful and more efficient. The more you can do that, the more likely you are to have your goal succeed. But HR things are tricky. And so think carefully about how you're going to get allies and how you're going to get buy-in before you embark upon that kind of a process. Any more, Valerie?
Not at this time, Janice, but we are at a 5-minute marker. We have 5 minutes left in this session.
Almost done. So, implementing, it's important to remember what you're doing and be very clear about it to everyone, to make sure you have participants and stakeholders on board, to think about a prototyping process that involves testing and revising and piloting. Make sure you've got a PR strategy. Make sure you have people ready to do guidance, that people are trained and that perhaps retrained and retrained again. There needs to be an official launch and an encouragement of faculty, including some thought to their workload and rewards. And it's like a successful political campaign. You've really got to get everybody on board and be very clear about what you're trying to do and why. So I think I'm going to skip the next. I'm going to go very fast through this part. When you're putting together Karuta, you're doing things like customizing a welcome page, designing the structure, adding resources that help students add different types of media. It uses semantic tags, it uses roles and actions. There's a way to create rubrics and create the components of a rubric. It allows users to use menus to do different things. You can construct dashboards and reports, all of this using JavaScript, so there's no programming, it's all using an interface. And again, suggesting that you test and prototype and revise and prototype and test until you've finally got a system that works for your people in your context. I promised some enhancements. Karuta version 2.3 is in final QA right now, and it's adding some things that are very useful to the administrators and to the people who are sharing their portfolios. So we now can export portfolios with all their files, either in an HTML format or an RTF format. The folks in Europe have now added a process where you can create bubble maps to have more visual displays of your learning within the portfolio. And administrators have better batch processes, better resources for customizing, and better resources for aggregating reports. To learn more about Karuta, we have websites. You can try Karuta in a sandbox. We have manuals that teach you how to construct your own customized portfolio using Karuta. You can find these manuals at our website. You can download Karuta, and we're always open to questions. We're looking for more adopters and more participants in our community, and you're very welcome. So if anyone wants to get in touch with me, here's how you can reach me, and I appreciate your attendance at this meeting.
Absolutely, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this session, and we thank Dr. Janice Smith for giving a great presentation. We hope that you enjoy the rest of your sessions today, and we'll see you in the next round.
Thank you, Valerie, for officiating. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Have a great day, everyone.